Hello, my name is Sammy Youth. I'm the president of the Canada-Europe Economic Chamber here in Brussels. So welcome to this webinar on New Brunswick. This is our last event of the year, but not the least, as we say, not the least, as New Brunswick is a strategic entry point to Canada, very interesting province to get more info on, and we're going to have a look on that. With this webinar. I want to point out that the Canada-Europe Economic Chamber is also not only organizing events such as the webinar or webinars and conferences and summit, but we do assist companies in order to grow their business into the European Union and into Canada or from Canada to cover the North American market. I want to thank also our elite premium partners that we're very fortunate to have. Which are Canada Goose, Shopify, Brainbox AI, EDC, Morrison Chapman, Port St. John, and of course, Opportunities New Brunswick. Today, we are also very privileged to have as a moderator Rosie Burchard, which is a correspondent here in Brussels for DW. So Rosie, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sam, and thanks all of you for joining. It's my pleasure to be your host today, wherever you are in the world. I'm here in Brussels, capital, heart of the European Union. And as Sam said, I'm a TV journalist here. I have spent time in the past covering the European Union, NATO, business affairs for Canadian television. So I'm used to what some of you have or may have in the future of looking across the Atlantic and examining these relations, which between Europe and Canada are frankly very rosy, a happy family relationship in general politically, which of course is good for business, maybe not so good for the news business, but that's my problem and not yours. This, of course, is not about me. It's all about our speakers today and about New Brunswick itself. And just a quick geography note for those in case are not in the know. So New Brunswick is a Canadian province located, it's on the eastern seaboard of the North American continent as a whole. So I think now let's not waste any further time. Let's cross the Atlantic, and I'd like to ask our speakers today to introduce themselves, and I will first hand over to Jay Reid. He is the Major Accounts Executive with Opportunities New Brunswick. Jay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosie. Good afternoon, everyone. As Rosie's mentioned, my name is Jay Reid. I'm a Major Accounts Executive with Opportunities New Brunswick, which is the province's lead economic development organization. Personally, myself, I've been with the provincial government for the last 12 years, and I've worked in numerous roles, including on our investment attraction team, which is where I first met our guest from Marshall, probably about 4 years ago, back in 2019. And what I'd like to do right now is, before we introduce other panels, I'd like to kind of set the stage for the webinar. So I'd like to provide a quick overview of the province of New Brunswick, introduce our organization, Opportunities New Brunswick, and tell you a little bit about how Opportunities New Brunswick has supported companies and will continue to support companies. So as Rosie's mentioned, she's done a great job of kind of painting the picture. I'll give you a little bit more of a picture. New Brunswick is located on the very east coast of Canada, and we're often regarded as one of Canada's hidden gems. We share borders with the province of Nova Scotia, the province of Prince Edward Island, the province of Quebec, as well as the state of Maine in the United States. So that'll give you kind of the geography of where we are and where we're located. In terms of kind of the province itself, you know, we have an amazing quality of life, many beautiful green landscapes, fresh air, proximity to the Atlantic Ocean, which is a selling feature, and access to many, many waterways for residents to enjoy. But what we say is, don't get distracted by our natural landscapes, our waterways. We know that the opportunities in New Brunswick are endless. So we're home to many successful companies, both large and small. Some companies that may be more familiar would be companies like Irving Oil, largest oil refinery in Canada, located in New Brunswick. McCain Foods, international food provider. 1 in 4 French fries at a McDonald's is produced through McCain's. Cook Aquaculture, IBM, Siemens, Thales recently joined New Brunswick. as well as Marshall and many other global companies have chosen New Brunswick as a place to do business and to grow from. New Brunswick itself, we talked about location. It's very ideally suited to service the large Eastern Canadian markets. So you may be familiar with the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. We're within a 8-hour drive of those markets. We're very easily to access the large U.S. Northeast markets. So think New York, Boston, those markets, all very accessible from the province of New Brunswick. But in terms of being able to connect around the world, New Brunswick is ideally suited to be able to import and export. We've got 2 ports, the Port of Belledune in the northern part of the province and the growing Port of St. John, which would be the leading container port in the province of New Brunswick, offers opportunities for companies to sell into the global network, all from New Brunswick. New Brunswick's also home to the fastest growing city in Canada. So the city of Moncton is the fastest growing city in all of Canada. And our population growth continues to break records. Our population now in New Brunswick is now over 830,000 people, and we continue to grow. A lot of that growth originally started during kind of COVID, when people were looking for, a different community for safer reasons, or communities that offered a quality of life that they might not have been able to get in the larger jurisdictions. And we've seen that growth continue to happen today. So that's the province itself. I'd like to talk a little bit about ONB and kind of who we are and what we do now, just to set the stage. So I mentioned in my lead-in, we are the lead economic development organization for the province of New Brunswick. So there are community agencies, but we would be the lead agency for the entire province. We work with companies to bring in new wealth to the province. We work with companies that are going to help create jobs, and we work with companies that are hopefully going to lead to more exports from the province of New Brunswick. Our team has a number of responsibilities. We've got teammates that focus on investment attraction, obviously bringing businesses to the province of New Brunswick. We have teammates that work on business growth, so helping existing companies to kind of grow. We focus on export development, so looking beyond the traditional borders in New Brunswick, where else can we help our companies sell? Obviously, the EU is being a very important market. Just based on our geography, the United States has been a traditional trading partner for sure. But how do we help companies diversify and become competitive from a global standpoint? We have a team that focuses on talent acquisition, so supporting companies to find the people that they require. And lastly, we also assist with business immigration. And as I mentioned, we work with companies of every size. We help them grow, scale, tap into new markets, and basically find success in New Brunswick. Talked about helping companies to identify their talent needs, to take full advantage of immigration and talent streams that are available for them to find the talent that they require. And just lastly, just to set the stage, we do have a number of sectors that we would consider would be priority sectors for the province of New Brunswick. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of set the stage for companies that may be listening in today. So obviously, Marshall would fall into this one. Advanced manufacturing is one of our priority sectors. Agritech, so think indoor growing, greenhouse growing, food production. Cybersecurity, very top of mind for everybody around the world today. Digital health, a growing sector of interest for us. Energy innovation, and of course, information communities technology has been, a driving sector for New Brunswick for a long time. So I hope that helps kind of set the stage for where we're located, what we do, and how we can support businesses. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Melanie Clark, to introduce herself and the role that she plays in supporting companies such as Marshall and others. Melanie.
Thanks, Jay, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melanie Clark, and I am the Director of Major Accounts and Development with Opportunities New Brunswick. So very excited to be here today and to be involved in this conversation with you guys. I've been with Opportunities New Brunswick for the past 10 years, and currently in my role today, I oversee supply chain optimization initiatives. So part of what we'd like to talk about today is around the supply chain and how we support companies and, why you may be interested in expanding into New Brunswick. So as New Brunswick companies expand, we recognize that they face all kinds of challenges in terms of selling into complex supply chain markets and moving into new and exploring new export markets. So our team here at Opportunities New Brunswick would take a very proactive approach to educate, connect, and support our New Brunswick companies. Specifically, we enable companies to build out their supply chains by connecting them with other New Brunswick companies, understanding their capabilities, gaps, and our team does this in a variety of innovative ways. Marshall today is a great example of how we can support companies and offer them a variety of other tools after they've signed a deal and move into our province. So beyond helping, as Jay alluded to some of the things that our organization does, beyond helping with the financial incentives, our talent attraction piece, we work in partnership with Marshall to identify how we could support them with New Brunswick companies that might have a potential to become part of their supply chain. So in doing that, we organized and coordinated 36 individual B2B company meetings where Marshall was able to get to know what we have to offer in New Brunswick, what our companies have for capabilities, how to determine if that supply chain was a fit for their new land systems manufacturing facility here in our province. We also supported them to introduce their Marshall Skills Academy to Canada and providing them some support so we can scale that and move that out. So I guess ultimately my message and what we'd like to talk about more today and have some conversations around is how ONB can be a liaison. We can help you with your goals for your organization, and we really want you to find success in New Brunswick. So whether that's through supply chain optimization, leveraging our stakeholders here in the province to help you with new channels for growth or what that may look like for you guys. So we're really excited to be here today. We're hoping to answer some questions that you have. And I would like now to introduce the Marshall team with Stephen Isaacs and Mark to tell a little bit about their story in New Brunswick. So super excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will apologize. Mark has not been able to connect, so I'm going to double and represent both of the elements of the organization. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Isaacs. I'm the General Manager of Marshall Canada. I've been with Marshall Canada for about 5 years, 4 of which, as Jay mentioned before, have been working alongside Opportunities New Brunswick in the province. Before that, I've spent 15 years in industry with another larger defense company based in Ottawa, which is where I am today, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. A little bit about Marshall before we get into the specifics of New Brunswick and what we're doing there and the support we've been getting from the province and from the ONB team. So Marshall is a British company. We are headquartered in Cambridge, north of London. Everyone I'm sure will be familiar with that place from the European perspective. We are a family-owned organization, one of the few remaining defense companies that are still privately owned, certainly in the UK, probably in Europe itself. Defense is a major part of the business, not the only part of the business. Overall, we have about 2,000 employees, and we have several sectors, including a properties group and other elements. But really, the defense business has been the one that has been the longest standing business. We've been incorporated since 1909 in the UK, so before the First World War. Because we are privately owned, we tend to operate as a mid-tier organization. So this kind of sits below the BAEs of the world and obviously above companies that we'd consider small and medium businesses. So we often will either prime programs or partner or subcontract with some of the bigger OEMs, from the defense industry that most people would be aware of. And that gives us, I'd say, unique access to both, the big and the small organizations. And one of the things we've been very happy with is the support ONB's given connecting us to those smaller businesses within the province at large. Our main customer is the armed forces. So my responsibility will be North America, so the Canadian Armed Forces, the U.S. Department of Defense, obviously the MOD in the UK and other NATO countries is really where I'd say from the Aerospace and Defense Group, 95% of our business comes from. Largely, we have two main business units within our defense group. We have an aerospace unit, which effectively is aircraft modifications, designs, and maintenance. And on the land system side, which I manage, is on deployable infrastructure. So think field hospitals and deployable modular containerized systems, which is what we're setting up the facility in New Brunswick to produce globally for the business, not only for North America, but globally as an export arm as well. Just a little bit more context to why Canada. So we've set up in Canada 15 years ago. We're at a bit of an inflection point in terms of our growth in Canada. We've determined Canada as what we're calling our second home market internationally, which means not only sales offices and things like that you tend to have in other countries, but really a fully comprehensive in-country presence where we can deliver from start to finish to our customer base. And Canada being that critical second home market because of the ties between the UK and Canada, as well as some of the benefits that Canada offers as access to the US market. So I think that's really important for European countries to be aware of is elements like the DPSA, Buy American Acts. We can circumvent those to a certain extent with some of the bilaterals that Canada shares with the US because of the border, obviously, and the relationship we have. So because of those two reasons, we've effectively determined Canada as our investment, country in terms of our global organization. That's notwithstanding, some of the very strict Canadian requirements for direct content. So when you win a contract in defense in Canada, it's legislated that 100% of that contract value has to be reinvested in the Canadian economy. So it's very, very hard to be competitive without a significant in-country presence in Canada. So that's really the crux of our strategy and why Canada. A little bit about Canada, and this will then kind of work its way into New Brunswick. Canada is very, very large. We all know that. We often show a map of the UK for our executives that fits nicely into one of our 10 provinces, and there's room for more. 4 hours between time zones across the country, and it's very regionalized because of that. If you work your way from east to west, you'll see different cultures, you'll see different economies, you'll see different political views. So when you pick a spot, it is very much regionalized and localized, and New Brunswick really aligned to both our corporate culture and obviously what we're trying to achieve in terms of the economic piece by investing in Canada. We'll probably get into it a little bit more in the Q&A, but being a European company, obviously access to the Atlantic shipping routes was massively important to us, especially as Canada is serving as an export facility as much as it is a domestic facility. So being close to the Port of St. John in New Brunswick and to a lesser extent, the Port of Halifax, just the next province over, critically important, and really why we initially targeted Atlantic Canada for our investment. And then we narrowed into New Brunswick for a bunch of different reasons that I think we'll probably get into later in some of the Q&A. So I'll hold on some of those thoughts. But again, very happy to be here and introduce Marshall and support certainly ONB over the course of the next 45 minutes.
Stephen, thanks so much for your introduction. I thank also our previous speakers, those that are here. So it's Jay Reid, Major Accounts Executive with ONB, and Melanie Clark, Director of Major Accounts and Development with ONB. Just a reintroduction if anyone joined late. Now, to those tuning in, just to say, please do feel free to share questions in the chat. We'll first talk to our speakers, but we'll be very delighted to come to your questions thereafter. And coming off from that, Stephen, I'd like to start with you. You gave us a bit of an insight into this, but I'd like us to rewind a bit. So you talked now about Marshall, about the company, and of course, here in Europe, suddenly in the news, we're hearing a lot about investment in defense, about defense industry, but of course, you've been doing this for a lot longer than before it was hitting the headlines so much. So let's rewind. When you were looking for a location to grow, what kind of factors were you looking at? What were the criteria you were searching for?
Find that button there. So there were a couple, I would say, non-negotiables. I mentioned, shipping access, being on the west coast of Canada and having the Pacific versus the Atlantic was not practical. So the East Coast always made sense to connect the organizations, having our headquarters and our second home market connected via a reasonable access for shipping. The time zone difference, we're in New Brunswick, we're 4 hours away from the UK versus 5, 6, 7. 8 when you start moving west into Canada. One of the main pieces, and this is, I would say, very unique to Atlantic Canada, but even more specifically New Brunswick, is the support, both federally and provincially. Historically, New Brunswick has been a province that has seen people leave rather than people come in, and because of that, we've seen a tremendous amount of support, and that's not only financial support, that's political support, that's just helping Marshall tie into the right areas. New Brunswick has stood above anyone else in terms of access to people, access to information, access, of course, to incentives and things that are important as a business as well. And those things have been tremendously important to us. Economically, again, when you look at each province, New Brunswick stands out favorably as it relates to some of the economics of doing business, and all that relates obviously to the industry that you're in. Now, I would say that New Brunswick has done an amazing job over the last 5 years of increasing those economics, and driving higher wages, which is excellent. Nonetheless, it still is very, very competitive when you look at the rest of Canada. And the other thing that I think Jay mentioned is there's a cluster effect, not only in the province but all over Canada as well. So it's regionalized, but also by skills and trades and clusters. A good example is you think of the automotive corridor in Southern Ontario. It's very localized to from Detroit up to Toronto. That's where all the business is done from an automotive sector. So if you're in that world, that's where you go. For us, we're into heavy manufacturing. And among the different clusters New Brunswick has, that's one that stands out in terms of having those skilled labor, that skilled trade, and businesses that can support our ecosystem. So it was really a combination of everything, and I would say across the board, New Brunswick came in favorably on all of those single things.
And Jay, was this a match made in heaven? Tell us from the other perspective, what was attractive about Marshall?
Well, I think, early on, I think there was a good kind of connection with the company. And I think we were connected with the company for a couple of reasons. Obviously, it's a well-known brand. Anytime you have a company that has over 100-year history, a track record of success, it provides comfort that those are the types of companies that I would want to bring to my province. So I think, that was obviously very enticing. Family run. You look at New Brunswick, we've got a very strong history of very successful family-run businesses, anything from like McCain to Irving, the J.D. Irving Group, even Ganong Chocolates. We've got a track record of family entrepreneurs, so there's a lot of similarities from that standpoint. But I think, a couple other things that really stood out. Obviously, they are a manufacturing business. It's a priority sector for us. Strong track record of success in that space, so that made us very comfortable in wanting to deal with them. But I know that oftentimes when companies are in the defense space, in the past, companies that were looking at opportunities may have been looking at a particular procurement contract, servicing that procurement contract and then leaving. And what we learned through our conversations with Marshall is that the approach was a little bit different. It was more of a long-term commitment to the province. So yes, obviously companies want to win procurement contracts for the Canadian government, but it was looking at, what are the opportunities beyond a particular contract and the actual investment to be in New Brunswick on a long-term basis and looking at using it for export. So I think, through early conversations and good relationship building and learning about the potential fit, it provided us with a whole lot of comfort. And again, when you're in, the space that we are from an investment attraction standpoint, when you have a brand like Marshall committing to New Brunswick, other companies pay attention. So I think, you know, selfishly, we're really excited that Marshall have chosen New Brunswick. We've chosen to work with Marshall, and we think that the relationship is going to continue to grow. And, you know, I think you're going to see some other synergies, and we're going to start to build that cluster in the province to support them. So we're really excited, continue to be really excited to be working with Marshall.
So it all sounds like a very happy story so far, but Stephen, there must have been some challenges, some surprises, something unexpected that came up during this expansion. Tell us, what kind of challenges did you experience? Maybe more positively, how have you overcome them? Are there some which remain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think two come to mind. One is, you know, when we started this, it was about a year before the pandemic, and pandemic hit, and this had been right when we had down selected the province of New Brunswick, but had yet to find a home in terms of a city location or a facility location, and that, you know, effectively stopped, you know, all progress for a little while. What we did find is and for a little context, Atlantic Canada, you know, effectively created a bubble situation. So while I'm Canadian, I'm from Ottawa, I could have been from anywhere else in the world. There was no special treatment for me if I wasn't from Atlantic Canada. That worked out very, very well in terms of surviving COVID for the area, but obviously it made you know, outsiders. It made challenging to go into the province and progress things. So while that slowed us down by 6 to 12 months, like it did everyone in the world, the ONB team worked very, very diligently to get Marshall, when things were reasonable, special access exemptions into the province. We did a lot virtually. We had virtual tours because of the networks that ONB has. Obviously, they were able to link us into property development groups, to brokers, to different people that we could talk to and progress more virtually, where I think we had assumed we would have boots on the ground and move forward. So while it did cause us, you know, a bit of a hiccup, it really didn't take us too far off schedule. And when things returned back to normal, we had set up enough of that virtual progress that we were able to relatively speaking, maintain schedule. The other thing that I'll mention, and I know that Melanie mentioned it in terms of the Skills Academy, and I'll explain that in a second, is you know, there is a shortage of skilled labor. That's because the province is growing, adding jobs. And I think the COVID actually helped accelerate some of that growth in the province, and that was unpredictable when we first started. We assumed that there maybe be a larger pool of skilled labor available. So that forced us to think a little bit differently, but it turned out to be a really great thing in retrospect, because one of the things we've done in the UK is very successful in apprenticeship program that we've been running for years and years. And if you're familiar with sort of the European model, the UK model, it's more of an earn as you learn scheme, versus in Canada where it's the more traditional, you go to school, you get a job, and the debt that can create tends to dissuade, you know, people from getting education. So this is a model that we've now worked with both the province of New Brunswick through ONB as well as the post-secondary institutions in the region, to develop a cooperative apprenticeship program that we believe will help actually grow the base of skilled labor, not only to serve us when we hire, you know, our cadre of people for the facility, but also the ecosystem and the supply chain, because otherwise all you're doing is splitting the pie up in a different way. And the whole idea would be to grow that, obviously, to create the economic value in the province. So while that was a bit of a surprise, it ended up, I think, being a really, really good outcome for everyone, and certainly for us as a business, being able to bring what we believe is a highly valuable skills and development program into Canada.
Thanks so much, Stephen. And you touched on it a bit there, but I wonder, is there anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of unique things which ONB has been able to do, maybe compared to other provinces, which has given you or provided you with a bit more comfort in making this decision? I mean, you talked there about some of the challenges and a good outcome. Anything that kind of more that cushioned that process along the way to what seems to be pretty good space now?
And this isn't only specific to, yes, this isn't only specific to ONB, but I would say there's a simplicity in the province that you won't get in some of the other provinces, like Ontario, as an example. You know, using just the education, there's two major institutions. One's a university, one's a college, and they work. And there's obviously different locations across the province, but they work together very well. You know, they work with industry very well. You go into a province like Ontario, and you might have 50 different colleges and universities that are all discrete and disparate and don't really cooperate. So New Brunswick, because of its size, has a simplicity to the government, the infrastructure, and the business, which allows things to happen very quickly. And access to people that would otherwise take a long time happens very quickly. So the agility, I think, in the province is one of the things that is very unique and hopefully is maintained as the province continues to grow.
Melanie, I want to bring you in here. You've been on the other side of this. What about supply chain solutions? Can you tell us a bit more there about ONB and what you've been able to offer, what you can offer in terms of that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So as Jay talked about a bit, I mean, we want to continue to work with companies as they land. So what we're trying to do with Marshall and with Stephen and his team is to look at all areas of where we may be able to help them be successful and grow. So one of those areas, as a new company comes into the province, they may not be familiar with our other companies, what capabilities we have, and what that looks like across the provincial landscape. So we can work, we are agile in terms of understanding. We have Opportunities New Brunswick officers clear across the province, which makes it unique in terms of us being able to take the gaps and the areas of interest from a company like Marshall, and we can help put New Brunswick companies in front of them. So we were able to put together a very complex event where we had over 36 companies with face-to-face meetings with Marshall, and that allowed them to start understanding what we have in the province that may be able to help them in their supply chain and develop that presence in the province.
Well, sounds like something extremely helpful. And then Stephen, I suppose you can tell us more about it from the other side there. I wanted to, if you could reflect a bit on your experience in New Brunswick since making that decision to open in Moncton. Have there been any standout moments, any things that will stay in your memory for good reasons or for not so good? Tell us about how everything has been going so far.
So it's been about 4 years. It's been a long journey, but it feels like it's happened so quickly. Like everyone's reflections of COVID, it was almost like a blip that 2 years went by like a flash, and it's almost how it feels in this sense too. I guess, you know, the word that you know, I keep coming back to, and Jay mentioned it too, is a relationship, right? So I think we've developed a relationship with the province, with ONB, with other key stakeholders, that it is a bit different than what I've been used to in the past, where you might, you know, find an opportunity, there might be some incentives, and then you might, you know, go through that as a very tactical situation, then everyone moves on, and ONB goes and looks for the next, you know, person, and Marshall goes and looks for the next contract. That hasn't happened. There's been no indication that will happen. It's a long-term dialogue. It's a long-term relationship. We've got another year of hiring where we're going to bring in, you know, about 100 people. That's going to take a lot of work on our end, and I know ONB is committed to helping us support through their organizations like PEDAL and other institutions that the province connects to. So I, you know, it seems a bit silly, I'm only saying good things. It's truly because I believe it. There hasn't been much that you know, has affected the relationship whatsoever. And as long as we continue to maintain that relationship, I think it'll be very strong moving forward. And as Jay said, I think one of the things that's helped is Marshall's commitment to be in there long term, the commitment to be an export player. The two first contracts that will be going into the facility will be European contracts that we're moving over from our Cambridge facility to get the production line started. So it is, you know, doing what we've said, and I think that then gives ONB the confidence to continue to work with us and continue to help support us.
Then let's look a bit into the future. I mean, you told us about your plans for hiring. So it looks like you know, this is a long-term commitment, as you've kind of outlined there. What do you think comes next? What are you anticipating in terms of challenges? What are you anticipating in terms of positive outcomes? And you said it yourself, you know, it's been positive, but for very good reasons, apparently.
Well, we have ambition. I mentioned the U.S. market. The one thing I failed to mention in terms of talking about some of the infrastructure that's been part of the reason why New Brunswick is there's a rail line right into the northeast of the U.S. So we have key access to the U.S. market. So when we look into the U.S. market, when we look into Canada, when we look into our exports, it's a matter of trying to manage that ambition and growth as we greenfield effectively an entirely new production facility. So our challenge is really, how do we balance our global operations to ensure that when we pick up Canada, we pick it up in a way that we're not starting too quick. We have the resources available, we've got the skills available, and again, we want to avoid causing any undue ripple effect in the workforce by not having the skills and trades available to grow the economy, rather than effectively just repurpose the current set of workers. So as we look over the next year, it's a matter of more on the operation side. How do we build it up while working with New Brunswick government so that we do that obviously together, and we make the right decisions together.
Jay, Melanie, I'd like to bring you in here. You can, either of you can take it, but I wonder just if you could tell us from your side, from the ONB side, also looking forward, what are your expectations for the next few years or even beyond? I mean, you alluded to this, Moncton being this very fast growing city. What are you expecting in terms of what your organization can do, can offer, or perhaps challenges to anticipate as well?
I think maybe to start off, obviously it's great to be in a growth position, and with growth comes some challenges, but there are also opportunities. So I think there's tremendous opportunities for us to continue to help prepare people for organizations such as Marshall and others that will be attracted to New Brunswick. And I think Stephen touched on it, based on our size, one of the things that we've always marketed, New Brunswick as, we're very agile. And Stephen touched on it, and we hear this comment a lot from companies that we've attracted to come to New Brunswick for site visits, to get to know us a little bit better, is the access to people and the speed of access to people. It's very unique to New Brunswick. You won't see it in some of the competing provinces that we operate in. So I think that'll continue to be one of our strengths, and that'll continue to kind of separate us from the others. But I think one of the other things that people are starting to pay attention to, the other thing is infrastructure. So, we're very well positioned, both from a highway perspective, but also from the port. So we've got a growing port. It's about an hour and 15 minutes away from their facility in Moncton in the St. John area. That continues to grow and continues to see big investments from other companies in the private sector. So CB Rail recently come back and acquired railway that links the Port of St. John to their network, which now makes St. John and New Brunswick have the ability to export from New Brunswick all the way into the Mexican marketplace via rail. So that's starting to get attention. You've got operators such as like DP World, one of the largest terminal operators in the world, choosing New Brunswick to make investments to grow. So we're seeing some significant international players looking at the infrastructure that we have that may set us apart for some others. So I think that's going to continue to see more growth is going to happen around the infrastructure that we have. And I think what we're probably going to see, Stephen alluded to it earlier on his comments, the trade agreements that Canada has with other countries. I think more companies are starting to pay attention as to, if I were to locate in New Brunswick, I can take advantage of certain trade agreements that I might not otherwise be able to do in my home jurisdiction. So I think in the future, we're going to see more companies starting to pay a little bit more attention. And I think we're going to see that New Brunswick's going to see more investment likely happen as a result of that, specifically on kind of the manufacturing side. So assembling goods to meet certain trade agreement opportunities. So I think those are some of the areas where we're going to see continued growth.
I may just hop in there and say around the infrastructure piece, what's also unique, and we're going to see continued collaboration, is around the people side of things. So as it's a global trend and we see how, you know, everyone's struggling with talent, and Stephen alluded to that piece, we are very aggressive as a province. We've invested in a variety of areas. And when we go back to that agility piece, we are working really closely with all the academic institutions in terms of finding solutions that fit industry needs. So we're listening to industry, we're bringing those players around the table, and we would be the lead economic development agency who has immigration as part of our portfolio. So we have an immigration team within our economic development team, in addition to all of these other proponents. So from a talent acquisition perspective, we are trying to be aggressive and very agile on how we can support companies as Marshall to bring in what they need for talent.
Melanie, can I ask you just to spell that out a bit more? I mean, you said there that you're working with education institutions on this, and then separately you have a team working on immigration, so maybe labor mobility. When you talk about working with institutions, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we talked about a lot of the R&D piece. We have come up with different partnerships, and with the Marshall Skills Academy, that would be a prime example of how we've brought those players and supported Stephen's team to bring some players around the table with those conversations. How do we accredit things in terms of skilled labor? How do we bring back some of those positions if we need machinists or whatever that may look like? We currently today have a few of our companies that have brought some training into their facilities. So they're training welders on site and working with our New Brunswick community colleges and other partners to be able to do that. And those folks leave with their welding tickets or what that may look like, so that we're combining industry and academics together.
And that's so often the issue, isn't it? That there is a kind of mismatch between what's being taught and what's actually needed out in the field. Stephen, can I bring you back in here? Because you have alluded to this a bit in terms of your hiring plans, and that it's also competitive for you. But you also talked a bit about how there's slightly different education systems benefits and perhaps cons when it comes to hiring. How's your experience been in New Brunswick, perhaps compared to the headquarters in the UK? What about that hiring side of things? How does it look by comparison?
Right. So practically speaking, and I'm not sure how this relates to the rest of Europe, but in the UK, the hiring cycle tends to be very, very long. Notice periods tend to be very, very long. Because of that, you know, there's a huge degree of investment, you know, probably 6 months in advance before you get someone, frankly, in Canada. And that's not just specific to the province of Brunswick, but we tend to have much quicker hiring cycles. So with the appropriate resource pool, you can move very quickly. So what we've seen certainly in the province of New Brunswick, which is a positive as it relates to some of the businesses we have in Ontario and British Columbia as an example, is working with you know, some of those educational agencies like PEDAL and other you know, support mechanisms through New Brunswick. We can get that pool, we can get those, we can start to build that pipeline, so you can really go quickly. And from a business perspective, there's always that timing element in terms of bringing people on because of the programs and the costs. So having the pipeline, having the quick hiring cycle really gives you a tremendous amount of agility, which is a word we've used before. And I think we're starting to see that, but it does mean, you know, developing those relationships with the people in the province and understanding the market in a way that we wouldn't without the support, because we're new to it. We don't know that province as well as we do other areas. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course there are always so many specificities to get your head around. You talked about how it compares to the rest of mainland Europe. Certainly here in Belgium, I think we'd even be more longer notice periods even. So that's something which one of our, I think, EU businesses would be familiar with. I have some questions coming up in the chat that I would like to get into. And I'm reading one here from Francesco Calazzo, who was an EU official, European Union official for 10 years, and who is now in Moncton. So quite an interesting voice to hear from. Francesco also has a question about workforce, and I'm going to actually direct this to Jay and Melanie and or whoever you feel more best placed to answer this. What about this uniqueness of a bilingual workforce? Does that have a special potential for Francophone relations? That's a question from Francesco Colazzo.
Do you want to take that, Jay, or?
No, you can go ahead and start.
I think a couple of things. Right now we do have some strategies around different relations in terms of immigration files from a Francophone perspective. We also have, you know, strong ties in a variety of areas, and we have 1 to 3 individuals, one of 3 individuals in the province today are fluently bilingual. So we are working, you know, to continue that dialogue. We definitely support, we have strategies around that whole language proponent. So I think there's lots of things we could have further discussions around that piece with.
Stephen, have you had any specific experiences on that? Don't feel obliged to answer, but I just wonder, I think it's an interesting question regarding that, the bilingual workforce experience.
As far as I'm aware, and this would be shameful if I got it wrong, New Brunswick is the only bilingual, officially bilingual province in the country. So there's value in our business to having a bilingual workforce. Largely our business has and will always be English, just in terms of the dominant language. However, having that bilingual workforce, we can certainly see advantages, you know, from a business perspective. It hasn't yet become a massive topic yet within our hiring plan, but I see it becoming that way as we start to bring people in. It's not a requirement we put on the business. However, I do see the value there.
Yeah, it seems like it's something unique, as you said, and I saw lots of nodding heads there from Melanie and Jay. So I think your factual statement was approved. I also want to bring in another question here. This is from Alain Alexis. So this is something a little bit more policy focused. So I perhaps direct this to Melanie and or Jay if you feel you have something to say here. So Alain says, Alain understands that a number of public support, different types of public support are available for companies, including in the case of European Union companies based in the EU deciding to develop a new business. So the question that follow up on that, I'll allow you first just to comment on what that first part, but then the question follow up is, so how do you see the implementation of new EU rules about controlling foreign subsidies to companies active in third countries in the EU? So quite technical, but listen, welcome to Brussels. We never are not that way. Alain says this new regulation will be applicable in July. You're very welcome to comment on that specific case, but otherwise, the start of the question was much more broadly about public support available for EU companies looking to relocate. So let's start a bit on that topic more broadly. And if you want to specify in further, please feel free to. Jay, would you like to go ahead there?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll start off. So, you know, obviously as the lead, the business development agency for the province, a big part of what we do when we're dealing with companies from, whether it's from the EU or anywhere around the world, is, you know, obviously one of the topics that always comes up is, you know, what types of financial incentives could be available to my company should we relocate in your province. So, you know, obviously, you know, ONB does play a role in looking at incentives. You know, we've got a range of different ways that we can support company. We tend to like to support companies that are going to be creating jobs. So we're looking at like payroll rebate type of incentives. So that would be supportive. But the other thing that we do as an organization, and Stephen talked about it early on, is it's not just Opportunities New Brunswick when a company chooses to locate in New Brunswick. There's other economic development partners that can come to the table to be part of the support structure. So in the case of Marshall and many others that we worked with, we've also worked with our federal government economic development agency. So in our area, it's called the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. So it represents the 4 Atlantic provinces, but basically think federal government economic development organization for our region. So we would work with them to identify areas where they can potentially play a role and where we can play a role. So a good example would be is we like to support people, talent. ACOA, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency role, tends to be able to support more so on kind of equipment and capital costs. So it's kind of marrying the two together to put together a package that would be attractive to companies. So I think there's a number of different things that we can do. And then there's the non-financial, which in today's world is sometimes even more useful, is making sure companies can find the talent that they require. So you can have the biggest financial incentive, but if you don't have the people to run your operation, that incentive is useless. So although we may not be able to compete with the large jurisdictions that have lots of budget, we're being very unique and strategic by looking at ways we can bring everybody together, but also look at areas where I think other provinces are not doing, and that's focusing on the talent acquisition and ways to bring it together. The last part of the question, I think I would have to defer to some of our colleagues on our export teams with regards to kind of new EU regulations that may be coming in, because it's not an area that I certainly have a lot of exposure to. So I definitely can't handle that one.
No problem at all. We can always, Alan, you're very welcome to follow up bilaterally on that particular question. And of course, there are working in this environment in the European Union, there are new rules all the time. But in general, I mean, the story of kind of rules and alignment between the EU and Canada, as far as I can tell, as far as I've been reporting on, is pretty aligned. And of course, there's this trade agreement, which we've discussed in the past. So there's plenty of kind of connections there as well across the Atlantic, and also in terms of standards and so on. But I think work still to be done there. Stephen, we haven't heard from you for a while. Do you want to come a bit back in here? So we heard Jay there talking about financial incentives versus workforce. What use is a financial incentive if you don't have the people to actually make this happen? How has your experience been in New Brunswick in terms of weighing up those two key parts of the puzzle to making a success?
Sure. So obviously when we had first started, our priorities were more focused on what location do we want to go to? What's the right place to access, talent, to access infrastructure, to access, the right economic foundation for our business. Now we've really shifted into how do we integrate our new capital in the building, and how do we find the right people? And what Jay mentioned in terms of, call it that, incentive mix is exactly what we worked out with both federal and provincial government. And what I will say is there's accountability on both sides there, because the payroll rebate model, which I think is excellent, incentivizes people, right? The more people you bring into the province, the more tax income that's generated, and the more support that the provincial government will give you. So there is this, we talked about the relationship, the continued relationship between trying to drive that economic value and working with the province to continue to get the support to do that. So both organizations are motivated in the same way, and that has helped us over time continue the dialogue about identifying talent, developing talent. And again, we saw challenges there. That's why we've introduced the skills and development apprenticeship program, because when we were starting to look at the details, because of some of the positive growth in the province, the unemployment numbers are low. The people looking for jobs in these trades are low. So how do we grow that workforce? And I think that's been the focus that we'll continue to work with the province on over the next 6 to 12 months to get up to that 100 new jobs, not existing jobs, just repatriated.
Thanks so much for explaining that. I want to just read a response here from Alexa Power, who says, in response to Francesco's question, she would like to add that we're looking at opportunities on the export side for partnerships in the French market for New Brunswick French-speaking companies. And there's a strategy in place to grow exports and partnerships in the French market, and common language is something looking to be leveraged. So that is Alexa Power from ONB. Melanie, I would love to bring you back in on you if you want to follow up on that. But I also think I would like to look a bit more broadly, because we have some other questions coming up here about, it's not quite our topic for today, but looking at the other side of what about how, let me see if I can find this question here to
I think on the trade side.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, Francesco says here that EU and Canada also are aligned in terms of privacy rules, lots of potential there, especially for Moncton. But Francesco also says, you know, CETA needs to be better explained to entrepreneurs to try and really get, you know, to leverage that potential. But anyway, I'm rambling. I'll let you take over, Melanie, who's a real expert.
Maybe I'll be like Jay. I won't get into the details of any of those agreements because that's out of scope for our team. However, Alexa is part of the export team who answered the question earlier. And we do have, as another arm of Opportunities New Brunswick, we have a whole team dedicated fully to developing export opportunities. And we have some collaboration right now happening in the EU market. That could look at a variety of things, from bringing some of our companies from New Brunswick over to the EU, exploring opportunities for them to work into new export markets. It could be that we've also at a variety of times engaged different consulting agencies and lead generation companies to help us work with your companies here to form better collaboration with our New Brunswick companies. So we do work on both ends of the spectrum, and we're certainly trying to identify opportunities for a number of New Brunswick companies to work with some of your companies.
Melanie, do you think there is a bit of a divide there, perhaps in terms of mentality of maybe New Brunswick companies seeing the EU as a bit remote? That's actually also a comment that's been brought in the chat by Francesco, just saying that, you know, there's a rather seeing this as something very remote opportunity rather than a tangible reality. Of what's clear to me is the work you're doing is trying to bridge that divide. But do you think there is a starting point?
Yeah, I think we are definitely working to reduce those barriers. We've been very aggressive. So in the EU market, we've opened up offices in India. We have an office in France. So we are trying to definitely reduce those barriers and help the world seem a little bit smaller for our New Brunswick companies to move into other countries with their products.
And do you think there's any, I also open up to Jay and Stephen, by the way, who also have the direct experience of this. On the other side, do you see a mentality that needs to be overcome there, not with any fault necessarily, but maybe just this, I mean, let's be honest, there's a big physical geography difference here, right? We talked about it so many times that we have to start by explaining where we are on a map, because you know, Jay, even you mentioned earlier, oh, it's just 8 hours drive. Of course, here in Europe, 8 hours drive is going to seem like quite a long time. We're working on different time zones, we're working on different geographical scales, basically. And do you think that's a bit of a mentality thing that just needs to be leapt over?
I think perhaps, I think the biggest thing is with regards to kind of educating kind of both sides. So, you know, I think there's, you know, Melanie's talked about it. Alexa is more involved, obviously, in the export team that's helping to educate New Brunswick companies on the opportunities that could be available in the EU. And that's doing everything from working with companies to help raise awareness that there's markets beyond just the traditional United States, which is closest, easiest. How do we help educate, support, and perhaps take companies for exploratory trade missions to maybe some key events to help them meet some people on the ground? How do we get those companies more engaged with folks at Global Affairs, some of the trade commissioner services, so that they can learn a little bit more? But I think it's also the same on the investment attraction side. I think, you know, we as Opportunities New Brunswick are trying to do better at expanding our reach and maintaining relationships with, you know, Global Affairs, who have representatives on the ground in the EU, and building better relationships with them so that they know New Brunswick is top of mind for when companies are looking at Canada or North America as a potential area to expand. So to me, it's about being aware that there are opportunities, and I think it's about building the relationship. I think relationship is really, really important, because if you have that relationship, someone's more apt to pick up the phone and say, hey, I've got an opportunity and I think you should be involved. And that could be either on the export side or a trade commissioner saying, you know, we've got a company interested in New Brunswick, and we would like to play that role of making that introduction to ONB. So I think there's ways that we can do a better job, but we are doing a great job in getting into market. And if there are companies that you know, would require some more in-depth support following this webinar, we would certainly be able to help out with that, you know, either by email or a phone call or Teams meeting to follow up.
And there will be follow-up. So for attendees, please be aware there's going to be a link. It should be posted in this chat, but I think you will also be able to receive some email follow-up should you so wish. And Jay, I heard you say something earlier that interested me when you spoke about the kind of incentives you've been able to offer, the support packages. We've heard a lot from Stephen about Marshall's case. Is there any other examples you would like to give us, just to give people from different industries insights into how it's been working? No need to name names if you don't want to or can't. Maybe you can talk about different industries. You told us, for example, some of those that are already active in New Brunswick at the start of this, but what about that kind of incoming experience?
So incentives for someone coming or someone that's already in the province, is that?
Well, I was interested to know if you've had other kind of success stories that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think, in terms of incentives, it's, obviously incentives are a big part of what companies tend to look to when they're talking to government organizations. So, there's certainly things that, are top of mind. I'd say one of the areas that we're seeing more and more interest in from, say, our manufacturing related companies is with regards to how do we improve our productivity. We're competing from New Brunswick. Sometimes the challenge to get labor is there. And how do we look to new technologies, automation, and those sorts of things to help our business to be able to compete in a global scale? So I know that from an Opportunities New Brunswick standpoint, we've been working with some existing companies at looking at how do we get you from this process now where maybe it's a little bit more manual, a little bit more time consuming, and maybe with some investments either through ONB or some of the partners that we work with, how do we look at bringing in productivity improvements to your business to allow you to be able to compete on the global marketplace? So I guess that would be, an area that we're doing a lot of work in as well. And it's certainly key to company success when you are looking at, a big part in New Brunswick is how do we drive exports beyond our borders? So I'd say that would be another key example of what we're seeing today.
Melanie, I just wanted to bring you in quickly because I wondered if you've given us some insights into all this help you're trying to provide. Is there an aspect of that help or your work specifically that you feel really proud of, that you feel is really having an impact?
Yeah, I think ONB as a whole has an impact, and we're really agile in terms of we don't have one cookie cutter solution. So we want to build that relationship. We want to understand what your needs are, how we can adapt, how we can change the tools that we have and what tools we have, how we can use them. I think that the recent movement on the supply chain initiatives and how we're trying to break barriers for companies within inside the province, those either coming in that are new, those who are currently there today, I think that's creating a lot of new opportunities and a lot of growth. From that growth, we have to remember, and there's been a lot of questions around the export proponent, as we help New Brunswick companies be more successful selling domestically, we're helping them position themselves to be successful in new export markets as well.
Sorry, even after all this time, we still sometimes forget to unmute ourselves. Right? Stephen, we haven't heard from you in a while. We miss you. I wondered, we're kind of drawing to a close here now, and I would like to invite you just to give us a bit of a taste of the next steps, the forward looking. You've told us about your hiring plans. What's the bigger picture here? And actually, Jay just touched on this a bit about, automation, about all these challenges and opportunities that technological developments are also bringing. I imagine that's also of key importance to Marshall and therefore also in your Canadian setup. Give us a sense of the direction of travel there, Stephen, where you're going, and if you have an end goal in mind as well.
Absolutely. One of the things, surprised I hadn't mentioned before, and it's around some of the initiatives is Marshall as an organization has a fairly aggressive green initiative to be net so carbon neutral by 2030. This is organizational globally. One of those elements that we're focused on, obviously, as we grow Moncton, is to make that as green as possible. And there's limitations with infrastructure. However, one of the big things we're pushing is to invest on green upgrades, green capital to grow the business as well. When we look at, the future for Marshall, with Canada being our second home market, it's really establishing a global organization. So while we've had offices in several different countries around the world for many, many years, really the pulse and the DNA of the organization has always been in Cambridge. So what we're doing is moving that slightly more into a global model, and Canada is the second piece of that. So our initiatives moving forward is to understand and to better fit Canada into the global operations model, which includes all those export opportunities and conversations we just had, breaking into the U.S. market, which I know is very challenging for European-based companies, considering the domestic incumbency. So it's using Canada as the beachhead to grow our international market, and then balance and create more efficiency in our production operations between the UK and Canada, and all that, comes back to talent, it comes back to the economics, it comes back to the support and everything we had just talked about over the last hour.
Stephen, thank you so much. Jay, I would like to bring you in next. We're looking towards the end of it here, but of course it's just the beginning, because there will be plenty of opportunities for people to follow up and get some more information. Take us there on the way. What is the bigger picture for ONB? What are you trying to achieve more broadly? We've seen Marshall as this, what seems to be really a shining example. What comes next?
Well, I think, in our circumstance, we hope that there's more Marshalls identifying New Brunswick as an opportunity for their growth plans. We've touched upon for the last hour on the reasons why companies should consider New Brunswick. So I think part of our team's role is to get out and continue to spread that message, that New Brunswick has kind of the infrastructure people. We can make things happen fairly quickly. So I think that's very important. But I think, looking at other arms of our business within ONB, and to some of the questions, I think it's again looking at new markets and how do we help our companies recognize that the EU is not as daunting as they might think, and if we provide them the support in the coaching and the guidance, perhaps they can find the EU to be a very successful market for their business from New Brunswick as well. So I think again it's a lot of work. There's a lot of things that we do from an Opportunities New Brunswick standpoint, but we have a very strong team, and as Melanie's mentioned, it's becoming international with people on the ground in other countries around the world, which is exciting for us. So it's how do we expand the reach and raise the awareness of not only New Brunswick but Opportunities New Brunswick and the role that we can play in companies having success. And I think there's a bright future ahead for New Brunswick, and I think there's lots of good stuff to come.
A bright future. What a positive note to start ending on. Melanie, we couldn't nearly go to anywhere as a bright future without having a word from you on that. What's your vision? What do you think comes next?
I think Jay just summed it up really nicely. I think if I could just take 1 second to leave everyone with something, it would be that if we if you can't come to New Brunswick, if we can't bring you into our province, we would love to bring New Brunswick to you. So how do we work with you? How do we bring and create those relationships? So it's definitely a two-way partnership that we want to create, as Jay alluded to. So think of it from that way. If New Brunswick isn't right for you, how can we bring New Brunswick to you? So I think that's how I would leave things.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just summarize again, once again, our wonderful panelists, who they are, because of course we've been hearing from you for all this time. I want to just take the opportunity to once again reintroduce you so that nobody forgets our wonderful panelists. First of all, we heard from Jay Reid, who's Major Accounts Executive with Opportunities New Brunswick. Jay, thank you so much for your time. We've also heard from Melanie Clark, Director of Major Accounts and Development with Opportunities New Brunswick, and Stephen Isaacs, General Manager of Marshall Land Systems Canada. Thank you so much to our three panelists for all your great insights there. And I don't want to let anyone leave without saying that we do have a call to action for you. And if people have questions, if you've been tuning in, if you would like to hear more, or you want to continue this discussion, Alexa Power from ONB has asked that you please email Jeff Gordon Johnston with the investment attraction team. So Jeff's email is Jeff with JEFF .Gordon-Johnson onbcanada.ca. And of course, I think this will also be able to be sent to you by email, in text after this as well. That is a call to action for you to be able to follow up with this. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. Melanie, you left on such a great note there that this is a two-way street, that this is something which goes in both directions. And I think what you've given us, all three of you, is a real insight into, if you wouldn't mind the phrase, a kind of land of opportunity and a wealth of opportunities that are still to come and just ready to be tapped into. So thank you so much for sharing it, and thank you to Sam, who of course is the brains behind the whole thing here.
Thank you, Rosie. Very nice of you. And I would like to add just a 2 cents. And speaking of cents for those investors out there from Europe, just a technical but very important point. 70 cents out of the euro, that's the Canadian dollar. For an investors, that's 30% discount. That's very important. And number 2, human factor. We were talking about the human factor, human relationship in New Brunswick is very important, very relevant, very out there, same value with the Europeans. So there's a fit there. And last but not least, there's a lot of business to be done from New Brunswick and in New Brunswick. And that's where the opportunities are. So that's my message.
And of course, Sam, you actually really live and breathe this transatlantic experience. You know, you're really, really on the front line of this, knowing from both sides, aren't you?
And I like it. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for Sam for rounding it up there. And I thank to all our guests, all of the attendees that have joined. And once again, thanks to our wonderful speakers, Jay Reid, Melanie Clark, and Stephen Isaacs, and of course to Sam Ayub.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.